The village where Atua lived was small, hidden among hills that seemed older than memory itself. Morning fogs often lingered there, resting upon rooftops like unspoken prayers. Her parents, humble people of faith, lived simply. The father worked the soil with quiet devotion. The mother sang softly as she cooked, her voice a thread of calm weaving through the house. In that silence, the child learned to listen before she ever learned to speak. Atua was not like other children. There was a stillness around her, not heavy, but deep, as if she carried within her the echo of something vast. Her eyes lingered on the sky longer than most would, as though she expected to find something written there. When the sun rose, she would stop playing and look upward, motionless, her small hands open as if waiting to catch something invisible. One morning, while her mother prepared breakfast, Atua sat quietly by the window. The first light of dawn entered the room, passing through the glass like a soft blade of gold. The mother turned, smiling, but her smile faded. The light seemed to rest only on the child. It wasn't harsh, nor ordinary. It shimmered with a gentle pulse, as if alive. Atua whispered, "It's the same light." Her mother froze. "What light, my love?" The child looked out again. "The light from the beginning, when everything started moving." No one spoke after that. The room filled with an uneasy silence. Not of fear, but of wonder that trembled at the edges. The mother felt her knees weaken, her heart quicken. The father entered moments later, and even he sensed that the air was different, as though the house itself was breathing slower, listening. That morning passed like a dream. Atua went back to her play, humming softly. A tune her parents had never heard before, slow and circular, almost like a prayer from a place older than words. When she smiled, it wasn't childish. It was serene, knowing, like someone remembering something too sacred to describe. In the days that followed, her parents tried to reason it away. Maybe she had heard a story at church. Maybe someone had mentioned creation, and her mind had woven the words into imagination. But deep down, they both knew. Atua spoke not like someone who had heard a story, but like someone who had been there. That night, as the lamps went out, the father found his wife standing near the window again, staring at the moonlight. "She said she saw the light of the third day," the mother whispered. He didn't answer. There are moments when even faith doesn't have words. And you, watching from the distance of another world, have you ever met a child who carried silence like a language? A child who did not learn the sacred, but somehow remembered it? Would you have believed her, or quietly prayed that it was just imagination? Days turned into weeks, and the word light became something the family avoided. They did not forbid Atua from speaking. They simply didn't know how to answer. The mother watched her child play in the dust of the yard, shaping small suns with her fingers, tracing circles that glowed for a moment and then disappeared. There was something peaceful about it, yet it unsettled her heart in ways she could not explain. Atua began to say small things, fragments of memory that seemed to come from nowhere. "One day," she said quietly, "the water stopped being empty." Her mother looked up from the laundry. "Empty?" "Yes. Before, it was only sound. Then, the light touched it, and the colors woke up." The woman felt a chill. Atua spoke as if remembering a dream, but her eyes were not distant. They were anchored, steady, as though she had seen something real. When the father returned from the fields, the mother told him in a whisper what the girl had said. He nodded slowly, not wanting to speak. Faith had taught him that creation was mystery, but hearing it spoken through the mouth of a 3-year-old was something else, like hearing thunder inside a cradle. That night, Atua sat by the oil lamp and drew with charcoal on a piece of brown paper. She didn't know how to write, but she drew lines of light, wavy, expanding. And, at the center, something that looked like a single eye surrounded by waves. When her father asked what it was, she answered softly, "It's how the light breathes before the day is born." He stared, his heart tightening. He didn't understand, yet some quiet reverence stopped him from tearing the paper away. He simply said, "That's beautiful, Atua," though his voice trembled. The next morning, she woke early and went to the window before the first bird sang. She stood there silent, as if listening for a voice hidden behind the wind. "He said it was good," she murmured. "I remember. He looked, and the light listened to him." Her mother, still half asleep, came close and froze at those words. "Who looked, sweetheart?" "The one who was alone," Atua replied simply and turned away. From that moment, the air around the house changed. Even neighbors began to feel it. A softness, a kind of still peace that lingered at the door when they came to visit. The father would try to smile, but his eyes betrayed something else, fear wrapped in awe. Every word his daughter spoke carried a weight that he could not measure. The pastor of the small church once said that children sometimes see what the old have forgotten, but even he, when told about Atua's words, grew silent for a long time. "Guard her innocence," he said finally. "If the light truly spoke to her, we must not drown it with our noise." Atua never seemed aware of the stir she caused. She played with stones and wildflowers, laughed softly, sang to the air as if it answered back. But every so often she would pause mid-laughter and whisper, "It wasn't dark. It was waiting." And in those pauses, something unseen passed through the room, like the hush before prayer, when the soul recognizes a presence too vast to name. If your child spoke like this, if she remembered something that should belong only to the heavens, what would you do? Would you silence her words, afraid they might be true? Or would you listen, trembling yet longing, for what your own heart has forgotten? As time moved forward, Atua's words began to weave themselves into the rhythm of the family's days. It was not constant. Her speech came like the wind, unexpected, quiet, carrying fragments of something too ancient to belong to her. Yet, each time the air shifted. Even the birds seemed to hesitate when she spoke. Her mother started to write things down in a small notebook, not to understand, but to remember. She felt that someday someone would ask, and she would need to tell it exactly as it had been. The pages soon filled with phrases that made no sense to reason, but felt strangely holy. The sky was soft before it turned blue. The water learned to sing when the light touched it. He called the colors by name, and they obeyed. The father grew restless. He loved his daughter deeply, yet there were nights he lay awake, watching the faint glow that sometimes seemed to move around her as she slept. It wasn't imagination. He had seen it more than once, a pale shimmer as if the moon had entered the room and chosen only her to rest upon. He prayed quietly, not for it to stop, but for the strength to witness what he did not understand. One evening, a storm came suddenly. The wind tore through the valley, and lightning struck near their field. Atua stood by the doorway, unafraid, her eyes fixed on the sky that burned white for a heartbeat at a time. When thunder shook the walls, she whispered, "It remembers him." Her mother pulled her close, trembling. "What remembers, Atua?" "The sky," the girl answered, "and the light inside it. It still remembers who told it to be." After the storm, silence fell like snow. Even the crickets held their breath. Her father walked outside and looked at the trees bent low, the ground soaked and glimmering. He could not explain the feeling rising within him, a mixture of reverence and sorrow, as though he were standing inside something sacred and fragile. He realized then that this mystery growing around his daughter was not meant to be solved. It was meant to be witnessed. Atua began to draw more. Circles, waves, spirals, always expanding. Once she drew 7 shapes of light, each slightly different, fading into one another like dawns layered on top of dawns. When her mother asked what they were, Atua replied simply, "Days." Then she added, "But the third one was the first that had a sound." Her parents looked at each other in silence. That night, they did not sleep. They sat by the window whispering fears and prayers in equal measure. "What if this is something we were never meant to hear?" the mother said softly. The father looked toward the child's room where a faint glow touched the curtain. "Or what if it's something the world forgot, and she's only remembering for us?" The next morning, Atua woke with a fever. She was calm, but her skin radiated warmth like sunlight caught beneath the skin. "It's heavy," she said weakly. "The light wants to go back to where it came from." Her parents wept, holding her small hands. But within hours, the fever passed, and Atua opened her eyes again, serene. "It's not leaving," she said with a faint smile. "It just wanted me to listen again." The mother, exhausted, sat beside her and whispered, "Listen to what, my child?" "To the silence that comes before the voice," Atua replied and drifted to sleep. Outside, the valley shone strangely. The grass still wet from the storm, the air trembling with scent of earth and renewal. Everything seemed to listen too. And you? If you had been there, standing beside that small window, watching a 3-year-old speak with the calm of creation itself, would you have felt fear? Or would you have recognized, in the trembling of your own heart, the same light that once said, "Let there be"? Word of Atua's sayings moved softly through the village, like incense that lingers long after the flame. No one spoke loudly about it. They spoke like people entering a sanctuary, lowering their voices as if the very air had become a tabernacle. In time, the parents invited the pastor, a patient man whose sermons were more silences than speeches, to visit their home. He came without entourage, carrying only a small Bible that looked older than his hands. He did not arrive to examine, nor to correct. He arrived to listen. On the threshold he paused, as though asking permission from the house itself. The mother offered tea. The father sat with a posture that betrayed both fatigue and hope. The pastor listened as they recounted the phrases they had written in the notebook. The water that learned to sing, the days drawn like rings of light, the sky that remembered the one who told it to be. He did not interrupt. He nodded rarely, prayed inwardly, often, and allowed the words to rest where they fell. When they finished, he closed his eyes for a long breath, as if placing every syllable upon an altar only God could see. Atua entered quietly, barefoot, carrying one of her spiraled drawings. She did not look fearful. She looked as children do when they have wandered into a garden and found a tree that feels familiar. The pastor smiled with the kind of smile that never pushes, only receives. "Hello, little one," he said, voice soft as linen. "Is that the morning you're holding?" Atua considered the page. "It's the day when the dry places rose up to breathe," she answered, almost whispering. The light showed them where to stand, and then the water knew where not to go. He called it good, and the plants listened. The pastor did not flinch. In his eyes, something like weather changed. Not a storm, not fear, a holy attention settling into place. He sat lower, so his gaze met hers without casting a shadow. "When you say he, who do you remember?" he asked, careful, reverent. "The one who wasn't lonely," Atua said. "He was full." She pressed her small hand against her chest as if to feel an echo inside. The light came from him, but also toward him like breathing. Everything was quiet because it was listening. Silence rested upon the room. The clock did not dare tick. The kettle refused to sing. The pastor's hands trembled once, briefly, then stilled. He opened his Bible but did not read. He held it like a lamp already lit. "Sometimes," he murmured more to the parents than to the child, "the ancient voice passes through a reed of clay. We must not claim it, only keep the wind from breaking it." He asked no clever questions. He did not map her phrases onto charts of doctrine. He asked presence questions, the kind that makes space rather than conclusions. When the light breathed, he asked gently, "Did it feel heavy or light in your body?" Atua thought. "Warm but not hot," she said, "like when the sun sits in a bowl of water." "Did you feel afraid?" "No," she answered. "I felt chosen to watch." The mother's eyes filled. The father pressed his palms together as if holding a delicate vessel between them. The pastor bowed his head and prayed, not a long incantation, but a simple offering. "Keeper of beginnings," he said softly, "teach us to stand near what we cannot measure. Guard this child's innocence. Guard our humility. Let what is holy remain holy." When he finished, he did not pronounce theories. He asked for the notebook, read the fragments, and returned it with care. "Write more," he said to the parents, "and protect the ordinary. Let her play. Let her sleep. Let the kitchen smell of bread. Mystery chooses to dwell where the daily things are tended." He looked again at Atua, whose gaze was clear as a morning without wind. "Little watcher," he added kindly, "if the light speaks again, you may simply smile. That is prayer enough." Before leaving, he stood at the door and regarded the home as if measuring its quiet. "Do not invite crowds," he advised. "Curiosity is loud. Wonder is gentle. Keep wonder." The father nodded, relieved by the permission not to perform a miracle for anyone. The pastor stepped outside, then turned back, hesitant, not uncertain but awed. "There is a question," he said, and his voice seemed to ask the house as much as the people. "If the first days are being remembered through a child, what is the Holy One asking us to remember with her?" He did not wait for an answer. Some questions are themselves a form of worship. "And you? Yes, you who hear this from the safe distance of another life, would you have the courage to look into that child's eyes and remain unblinking before the sunrise of the world? Or would you lower your gaze, afraid of what the light might reveal in your own heart? News travels strangely when it carries the scent of the sacred. It does not shout. It breathes. One person mentions it to another beside the well. Another whispers it during prayer, and soon the rumor is no longer rumor. It becomes a presence that walks among the people. So it was with Atua. Her words, her calm, her way of looking at light as if it had a name. All of it spread beyond her home, moving gently as though the air itself were telling the story. At first, the villagers came only out of politeness. They brought food, small gifts, offerings of goodwill. They asked nothing, said little. But when they stepped into the child's house, something happened. The noise in their minds grew quiet. Conversations slowed. Even the smell of bread seemed purer there. Some said it was imagination. Others said it was grace. Whatever it was, it touched them. An old widow, known for her bitterness, came one afternoon. Atua was playing near the doorway, humming that circular melody again, the one her parents could never place. The woman sat beside her without speaking. Minutes passed in silence, and then tears began to roll down the widow's face. "I don't know why," she whispered, "but I feel forgiven." Atua only looked up and smiled. Not a knowing smile, but one that seemed to remember mercy before words existed. Soon after, a man who had not entered church in years came by. He had mocked the stories, saying children dream strange things. Yet when he met Atua's gaze, something broke inside him. Not pain, but release. He later told the pastor, "She didn't say a thing, but I felt as though the air itself was praying for me." From then on, people began to linger near the child, not to ask for miracles, but to be near. They said being close to her was like standing under light filtered through leaves, warm, gentle, never blinding. There was no performance, no prophecy, no command, only peace. The kind of peace that asks for nothing and explains even less. Her parents watched in quiet astonishment. They had wanted to protect her from noise, yet it was the silence that now drew the world in. The father, though still unsure, began to see that faith was not only something one believes, but something that sometimes happens to you. The mother, more tender now, stopped fearing her daughter's words. She began to hum the same melody while cooking, noticing how calm filled the kitchen when she did. One evening, the pastor returned. He did not bring his Bible this time, only his listening. He found Atua in the yard, watching the sunset bleed into gold. "What do you see tonight, little one?" he asked. She pointed to the horizon. "It's remembering again," she said softly. "The light?" She nodded. "It still remembers being born." The pastor stood beside her in silence. The world around them was ordinary. Goats bleating, smoke rising from distant kitchens, and yet the moment felt stitched to eternity. Perhaps, he thought, creation never stopped happening, but only hides inside the eyes of those who still remember. The villagers, too, began to change. Arguments softened. Prayers grew quieter, more sincere. Some confessed sins without being asked. Others forgave old wounds, not out of guilt, but because they felt seen by something older than time, something that now seemed to live in the valley's air. No one could say how it began or why it lingered, but every heart touched by the mystery carried a strange ache, not of fear, but of longing. They did not seek explanations anymore. They sought presence. And you, if you had walked into that valley, would you have sensed it too? Would your own breath have slowed? Your heart remembered what it once knew before forgetting? Has your soul ever recognized something before your mind dared to understand? It began with a whisper, the way rain begins in a thirsty land. Someone suggested a vigil, not a spectacle, not a crusade, just a night of keeping company with the quiet. The pastor agreed only on one condition. There would be no announcements, no music, no lights that pretend to be light. "We will wait," he said. "If the Holy One wishes to pass among us, we will not crowd him with our noise." They gathered at dusk in the small church that smelled of wood and bread. Lamps were lowered until the room breathed amber. People sat as if inside a story older than speech. The father held the mother's hand, and the mother held her breath, and Atua sat near the front with her small feet not touching the floor. She was not the center, she was simply present, like a window that does not own the sunrise but lets it pass. The vigil unfolded in silences. A psalm whispered and left unfinished, a sigh that became a prayer without words. One after another, villagers rose to confess the simple stuff of being human. Impatience, envy, small cruelties, the exhausted kind of selfishness that grows in people who have forgotten to be seen. No one corrected, no one defended. The room received each confession the way a forest receives wind, wholly without argument. Hours passed, measured not by the clock, but by the deepening of attention. At some point, no one could later say exactly when, the air shifted. It was not colder or warmer. It was more true. The pastor, who had been sitting on the lowest step, lifted his face as if a fragrance had entered the room. The father felt the weight he had carried for months loosen like an unknotted rope. The mother brought a hand to her mouth. A holy shyness fell on them all. Atua stood. She did not hurry. She turned to the small window where night pressed itself like velvet against the glass, and she placed her palm there as if greeting an old friend. Then, with the gentleness of a leaf turning toward light, she spoke. Not loudly, not softly, simply rightly, as if her voice had found its native air. "I saw the light of the third day," she said. "It was not a blaze, it was a call." No one moved. "It went across the waters," she continued, and the waters bowed. Then places rose, dry and quiet, and the light told them, "Stand here." The water understood. "Then I will sing here." And the seeds woke up like sleeping birds. It was not loud. It was a listening. A trembling passed through the room, not fear, but the ache of beauty recognized. The old widow covered her face and began to weep without sound. The man who had mocked religion felt not shame, but the humble relief of someone who has finally arrived home and doesn't need to explain why. Atua opened both hands, as if holding nothing and offering everything. "He looked," she whispered, and the whisper felt larger than the walls. "He looked and liked what he saw." The light looked back at him. "That is why the world remembers." She turned toward the pastor. "It still remembers tonight." The pastor was already on his knees, not because a child had spoken, but because something had moved through her that demanded kneeling from anyone who understood how to be human. He spoke only 2 words, the oldest he knew. "Thank you." Silence followed, not empty, not absent, a full, living hush, like the pause between a question asked by the heart and the answer about to arrive. In that hush, some felt warmth in the chest. Some felt the forgiveness they hadn't dared to seek. Others felt the kind of peace that doesn't erase sorrow but dignifies it. No doctrine shifted that night, yet everything changed. The room became a shore, and the people became witnesses to a tide that had always been faithful. A breeze entered through the window, though no window had been opened. The lamps did not flicker, they steadied. Somewhere a child beyond Atua yawned and fell asleep against her mother's shoulder, and it felt right, as if creation itself were tucking humanity in for a moment of rest. When Atua sat down again, she was simply a little girl, tired, leaning her head on her mother's arm. The spell, if it was a spell, did not vanish. It settled like dew. The pastor rose and, with a voice woven of tears and quiet, said, "Go in peace. Take nothing from this night except more gentleness for each other." They left slowly, reluctant to break the hush, stepping into the valley where the sky had cleared and the stars shone like first words. The father, walking home, realized that faith had not been proved or disproved. It had been remembered. The mother traced a cross on Atua's forehead, not as magic, but as gratitude. And the night? Yes, the night itself seemed to listen longer than usual before turning toward dawn. And you, if you had been among them, that tender hour when the world remembered its beginning, would you have dared to listen? In the silence, where the sacred moves without spectacle, would you have heard? Or would fear, loud and impatient, have spoken first? The morning after, the vigil felt weightless, like the earth had been rinsed in stillness. Mist clung to the valley's edges, and the trees stood motionless, listening to the new quiet that had entered their roots. Atua awoke before her parents. She went to the window, the same window where she had first seen the dawn that remembered. The light was gentle now, not the light of visions, not the light of beginnings, just the honest gold of daybreak. She smiled at it as one greets an old friend returning home. Her parents rose, uncertain what to expect. But Atua was simply herself again, playful, humming, hungry for bread and honey. The notebook lay untouched on the table, its pages filled with impossible sentences. They no longer needed to add more. The mystery had ceased to grow outward. It had turned inward, into silence, into gratitude. The father went out to the fields. The same soil he had always worked felt different beneath his hands, not transformed, but known. The mother watched her daughter help gather water, laughing when the bucket splashed. The laughter was not supernatural. It was holy in its ordinariness. It reminded them that heaven's work often returns to earth disguised as peace. In the village, life resumed. The baker lit his oven. The children chased goats along the stone path. The pastor reopened the church without announcement. Yet nothing was quite the same. The people spoke softer. Quarrels ended before they could grow sharp. At night, when lamps were extinguished, a faint serenity filled their rooms. The afterglow of something they could not explain, but no one wished to lose. The pastor wrote in his journal, "Perhaps revelation does not come to teach us something new, but to remind us what we once knew and forgot." He kept the notebook the family had given him, the one with Atua's phrases, and locked it inside the altar chest. "The child must not become a shrine," he said to himself. The light did not come to be worshipped, but to be lived. And so, Atua lived. She grew. She ran through the fields at dusk, hair shining like threads of the same dawn she once remembered. Her parents no longer feared the mystery. They had learned to coexist with it, as one coexists with the heartbeat, unseen but faithful. Sometimes, at night, when the stars looked close enough to touch, she would whisper before sleep, "It's still singing." Her mother would smile in the dark. "What is, my love?" "The light," Atua would say. It never stopped. Years would pass. The drawings would fade, the pages yellow, the words become legend. Some would doubt. Others would tell the story with trembling conviction. But those who had been there that night, those who felt the breath of silence in that church, never forgot. They did not need to. The memory lived on, not as history, but as presence. And when Atua grew old, she still refused to explain. She would only say, "I didn't see a vision. I remembered." Then she would close her eyes, and her face would soften into the peace of one who has already seen the first morning. The valley itself seemed to echo her calm. Each dawn, when the light spilled over the hills, it was as if the earth whispered back to its maker, "I remember too." So the mystery ended as it had begun, not with thunder, not with proof, but with stillness, a sacred stillness that lingers wherever hearts choose wonder over certainty. And now, as you listen, far from that quiet valley, how many whispers has God sent to your own life, soft as light against the window? How many of them did you sense but never stop to hear? Perhaps the divine does not shout to the world. Perhaps it leans close and murmurs into the soul, "Be still, and remember,